Ever dig up, like, super old texts, and you're like, what in the world did I even mean?
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah.
It's
Yeah.
crazy how much language changes, especially online.
Totally. Things evolve so quickly.
And get this. Imagine that same energy, but with, like, computer programming.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So today, we're going deep on something called Gen Z-style code.
Okay.
But don't worry, this isn't about some new coding language taking over the world yet. It's more like a fun way to wrap our heads around, the core ideas behind how programming actually works.
I'm intrigued.
Right. So, picture this. The first line of code we see is just straight up yoink data.
Yoink data.
Yoink data. What do you think that even means?
Well, knowing a little bit about these things, I'm going to guess it has something to do with getting data from somewhere. Data is like the lifeblood of any program, right?
Okay. Exactly. Without data, programs are basically useless. It's
Yeah.
like trying to bake a cake without any ingredients.
Right. You need that raw material to work with. So yoink is basically saying, all right, let's grab the stuff we need to get this show on the road.
Love the analogy. Okay, so we've yoinked our data. Now what? Well, get this. Next up, we have cooking. And apparently in this Gen Z coding world, that's how we define functions.
Cooking functions. Okay, I'm all ears.
So think of it this way. A function is like a recipe. You have your ingredients, which is our data, and the recipe tells you step by step how to combine and cook those ingredients to create something delicious. Right?
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Well, functions in programming are kind of the same deal. They're like these reusable blocks of code that take in some data, maybe do some calculations or whatever, and then they spit out a result. It's like input, process, output.
Like a culinary machine. You put in raw ingredients and out comes a delicious dish.
Exactly. Now, the example function we have here is called check data. So I'm guessing it checks the data we just yoinked.
Sounds logical.
But hold on, because then things get even spicier with this line. If pass vibe check.
Vibe check. Okay, now you're just messing with me.
No, I swear it's really in here. But what does it even mean for code to have vibes?
All right. Vibe check, as wild as it sounds, is probably their way of representing a super important programming concept. Conditional statements.
Conditional, like if this, then that.
Exactly. It's how a program makes decisions. So this if-pass vibe check thing is basically checking if a certain condition is met. Like, is this data actually good? Does it make sense? And if it does, cool, the code goes one way. If not, it takes a detour and does something else.
So it's like online shopping. They always got to do a vibe check to see if you actually have enough money before they let you buy that awesome new pair of headphones.
Precisely. Or, if you're entering a password, there are checks to see if it meets their criteria. It's all about those IF statements, making sure things are flowing as they should.
Right. Got to keep those vibes in check, or the whole thing might crash.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got our data. We're cooking it up with functions. We're making sure the vibes are right. What else could there be?
Let's see what other Gen Z gems this code has in store for us.
Well, buckle up, because the next part had me scratching my head a bit. Yeet W or yeet L?
Yeet. Anything in a program would make me nervous.
Right. Like, are we celebrating a win here? Or is it like, game over, you lose? What are these WNL things all about?
Okay, so in most programming languages, yeet would absolutely send your code into a tailspin. But here, I think we can relax a bit. My guess is they're just using W and L as shorthand for different outcomes. W for when everything's good, a win, and L, well, not so much.
So like W, everything's groovy, keep going, and L,
yeah.
Oh, something went wrong, hit the panic button.
Exactly. It's all about simplifying things, making the code easier to read, even if it sounds a little unorthodox.
I can dig it. But the fun's not over yet. Oh, no. Because now we stumble upon this word splat. It's using this calculate profit function, and this line in particular caught my eye. Main character, rest. Splat. Input.
Splat. That sounds messy. Hopefully it doesn't stain.
Right. Like, what are we splatting? And why? Is this some kind of abstract coding art project?
Haha. I wish. But splat, as messy as it sounds, is probably just their way of breaking down data into smaller parts. Think of it like unpacking a suitcase. You've got all your stuff crammed in there, and splat is like opening it up and laying everything out neatly.
Okay, so it's more organized than it sounds.
Exactly. In this case, splat takes the input data and divides it up. The first piece of data becomes our main character, and then everything else gets put into this other container called rest.
I kind of love how this Gen Z code makes me think about things in a totally new way. Okay, we're almost at the end here, but there's one more head scratcher. This line of code stonks.
Yeah.
Main character, calculate profit, rest. Now, I'm no coding whiz, but Didn't we just see that calculate profit function earlier? Is that thing calling itself?
You've got a sharp eye. That, my friend, is the magic of what we call recursion.
Recursion, that sounds intense.
It can be, but it's also incredibly powerful. It's like this. Imagine you're trying to figure out how many books are on a really tall bookshelf. Instead of counting each one individually, you could use recursion. You check how many shelves there are. Then you tell yourself, okay, I'll just focus on counting the books on one shelf, and then I'll repeat that process for each shelf.
So it's like breaking down a big problem into smaller, more manageable chunks.
Exactly. And that's what's happening here with this calculate profit function. It keeps calling itself each time, working with a smaller chunk of the data until finally it's got the answer and it passes it back up the chain.
Wow, recursion sounds both elegant and a little mind-boggling. Okay, so we've yoinked our data, cooked it up with functions, made sure the vibes are in check, splatted things around, and even sprinkled in some recursion for good measure. What happens next? What's the grand finale of this Gen Z coding masterpiece?
Well, it seems like our Gen Z code here checks the data, uses that data to figure out the stonks, presumably profit, with a little help from that recursive magic we talked about. And then, based on the results, it decides what to do. If everything looks good, we're in W territory. It probably just keeps on trucking. But if something seems off, if it's a big fat L, then things get a little more .expressive.
Oh, how so?
Let me guess, it throws a Loki bonk error.
You're reading my mind. Seriously, though, low-key bonk. Is that like the Gen Z way of saying, Houston, we have a problem?
Pretty much. It's the program's way of saying, something's not quite right here. We need to pause and figure this out.
From yoink to bonk. This deep dive into Gen Z-style code has been surprisingly insightful. Who knew that a little slang and some creative phrasing could make these core programming concepts so, I don't know, approachable? It's like suddenly coding doesn't seem so intimidating anymore.
I agree. It really highlights how the underlying principles of programming can be understood and even appreciated, regardless of the language or how we choose to express them.
Absolutely. It kind of makes you wonder, how else could we use this Gen Z style to explain other complex ideas? Something to think about.